it is God's will for you on a personal level and on a corporate level to have too much. So that I'll be clear now. I want to be clear because I don't want you to mix this with anything else. When I'm talking about too much, I'm talking about it's God's will for you to have too much material resources. I'm talking about it is God's will for you to have too much financial resources. I don't want you to mix this thing now. I'm not talking about spiritual things. It is God's will for you to have too much money. It is critical for believers to understand the purpose for too much. When we understand right purpose, when we understand the why, then we can believe for it with the right motives. Let's look at John chapter 6, verse 1. It's after these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias, and a great multitude followed him because they saw his miracles, which he did on them that were diseased. Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples, and the Passover of the feast of the Jews was near. When Jesus lifted up his eyes and saw a great company come unto him, he said unto Philip, whence shall we buy bread, or where can we buy bread so that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. So when Jesus said to Philip, where can we go to get bread so we can feed these folks? He already knew where he was going to get the bread from. He already knew what the answer was. He wanted to know what Philip was thinking. Listen what Philip said in verse 7. Philip answered him, 200 penny worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them, now listen carefully, may take a little. Come on, say a little. So right there, we see Philip's mentality. He doesn't have an abundance mentality. He has a little mentality. Verse 8, one of his disciples had another idea. Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, said unto him, there's a lad here. So it sounds like this guy got some faith. Doesn't it sound like it? There's a lad here which has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Now, don't think of loaves of bread. It's not loaves. This is a kid's lunch, okay? We talking about 5 biscuits, okay? Think biscuits. Think 2 sardines. I mean, think about it. The kid didn't come to the meeting with 5 loaves of bread. No, this is a kid's lunch. This is a kid's lunch. So it sounds like Andrew has great faith to even mention it, right? But then he messed up. Watch this. There's a lad here which has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. But what are they among so many? Jesus said in verse 10, make the men sit down. Now there were much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, just the 5 loaves, the 5 biscuits. And when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that sat down, and likewise of the fish, as much as they would. Come on, say as much as they would. Now look at verse 12. And when they were filled, come on, say when they were filled, he said unto the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered together and filled how many baskets? 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 loaves which remained. Now listen at the words, over and above them which had what? We don't know. The scripture doesn't tell us what the 12 baskets were for. But the scripture tells us that Jesus said, now I want you to gather it up, that nothing be lost, which tells me he was going to do something else with the 12 baskets, because God is not wasteful. some Christians, in fact, many Christians, do not, and some of you, do not have too much because you hadn't asked for it. There's nothing wrong with you praying for your needs to be met. It is biblical for you to believe God for your needs to be met. What I am saying to you, that if your prayer stops there, with your needs being met, then that is a selfish prayer.